Hey there, tonight we dive into the hidden stories of history's unsung heroes, the people who shaped the world through quiet resilience and unspoken courage. From the ancient empires that rose and fell to the lost kingdoms beneath the sands, tonight's journey uncovers the mysteries that time nearly forgot. We'll explore how ancient civilizations survived, adapted, and thrived against all odds, their secrets and lessons that still resonate today. Before we dive in, take a moment to hit that like button if you enjoy these deep dives, and don't forget to subscribe so you can keep coming back for more historical adventures. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always interesting to see where in the world you're joining us from. Now take a deep breath, maybe dim the lights, and settle in for tonight's exploration. Let's unravel history together, one forgotten story at a time. In the days of humanity, long before the rise of cities or civilizations, the world was a place where survival itself was the most precious commodity. The prehistoric period, spanning thousands of years, was marked not by the sweeping wars we read about in textbooks, but by smaller, more intimate conflicts that would leave an enduring mark on our species. While the history of humanity's prehistoric wars is largely lost to time, one such conflict stands out in the fossil records and genetic of modern humans. It was not a war fought with the weaponry of an ancient empire, but one fought with the raw, primal forces of survival. This war is a mystery, an ancient struggle that resulted in a drastic decrease in the male population of early human societies. Genetic evidence today suggests that nearly 94% of all men alive at the time perished in this conflict, leaving behind a powerful legacy that still shapes us today. This war is often referred to as the Y chromosome bottleneck, but what was it really? How did it occur, and why did it almost wipe out our species? This is a forgotten battle, not in the sense of a clash between tribes or kingdoms, but in the sense that it was a struggle for the survival of humanity itself. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but in the vast savannas of Africa, where early human ancestors, proto-humans, began to emerge. These early beings were not yet the Homo we recognize today, but a closer, more primitive version of ourselves, constantly adapting to their environment. Theories suggest that the war started with a dramatic change in climate or a catastrophic environmental event. This could have been a massive volcanic eruption, a rapid shift in weather patterns, or perhaps a series of events that led to a sudden population bottleneck. The result of this catastrophe was a significant thinning of the gene pool. The populations of early humans, which had once been spread across Africa and beyond, were suddenly reduced to small, isolated groups. As food sources became scarce and living conditions grew harsher, humans began to compete more fiercely for survival. But what is perhaps most intriguing is how this competition played out in gender-specific ways. Men, as the primary hunters and protectors of these small communities, found themselves at a disadvantage. The Y chromosome bottleneck theory suggests that the genetic diversity of male humans decreased significantly due to a combination of factors, one of which may have been a war in which men fought, not just against each other, but against nature itself. As tribes and groups scattered in search of food and shelter, their survival was increasingly determined by who had the resources to fight or flee. The harshest of these battles were not always direct. They took the form of competition for mates, for food, and for territory. Genetic evidence shows that, during this time, human males were significantly less genetically diverse than females. What caused this disparity? Was it the direct impact of warfare, or was it of other factors, such as disease or famine? Theories abound, but one thing is certain: the aftermath of this great struggle would be felt for millennia. The bottleneck left behind only a fraction of the male population, and as a result, the genetic markers that identify male ancestry, specifically the Y chromosome, are found in far fewer variations today than those of females. But this loss was not merely a genetic one, it was also a cultural and social one. The survival strategies of early humans began to evolve dramatically after this period, and the ways in which men and women interacted shifted forever. So what did this war look like in reality? Was it a series of isolated, small-scale skirmishes, or something much more catastrophic? How did this nearly fatal conflict contribute to the evolution of modern humans? And perhaps most importantly, what lessons can we draw from this ancient struggle as we face our own battles in the present day? As we ponder these questions, we are left to consider one final thought. If this event was so pivotal in shaping the future of our species, why is it almost entirely forgotten? Why has the history of the Y chromosome bottleneck remained so elusive, buried beneath the sands of time? As we continue our exploration of the forgotten prehistoric war that nearly wiped out all males of early human societies, it is important to delve deeper into the potential causes and consequences of this mysterious event. In Section 1, we considered the Y chromosome bottleneck, a genetic phenomenon that dramatically reduced male diversity in the human gene pool. But how did this bottleneck happen, and what role did environmental factors play in this process? One theory suggests that a sudden, catastrophic environmental event triggered a drastic reduction in human populations. This could have been a climate shift, such as the onset of a glacial period, or a volcanic eruption that released massive amounts of ash into the atmosphere, blocking out sunlight and disrupting ecosystems for years. Such an event would have resulted in food shortages, mass starvation, and increased competition for resources. This competition would have been most acute between the males of early human groups, as they fought for mates, territory, and food. The struggle for mates may have been particularly brutal. With fewer resources available, the reproductive success of males became increasingly dependent on their ability to compete for the attention of females. This competition likely took several forms, from physical confrontations to displays of strength or skill, and ultimately only the strongest males would have survived. Those who were unable to compete, whether due to injury, illness, or social isolation, may have died off, contributing to the dramatic reduction in the male population. The Y chromosome bottleneck theory is not without its detractors, however. Some researchers argue that a more plausible explanation lies in a series of other factors, such as disease outbreaks or social structures that the survival of females over males. In a world where the roles of men and women were sharply divided, men as hunters and protectors, and women as gatherers and caretakers, female groups may have been better able to sustain themselves during times of crisis. Women often had access to more varied food sources, such as plants, nuts, and fruits, which could have provided better nourishment during periods of scarcity. Moreover, the rise of early agricultural practices may have also played a role in the shift away from male-dominated survival strategies. As humans began to settle into agricultural communities, the need for constant hunting and the associated risks decreased. Farming, which required a different set of skills, allowed for more stability and predictability in food production. With a more stable food supply, the pressure on males to compete for resources diminished. It is possible that this change in lifestyle may have led to a decrease in male competition, further contributing to the genetic bottleneck. Despite these varying theories, one thing remains clear. Whatever caused the drastic reduction in the male population, it had long-lasting effects on the trajectory of human evolution. The aftermath of this bottleneck would have left a lasting imprint on the genetic of future generations, with the genes of the few surviving males dominating the gene pool. This explains why even today, human males are far less genetically diverse than females. In fact, studies of Y chromosome DNA have shown that all human males share a common ancestor, often referred to as Y chromosomal Adam, who likely lived around 200,000 years ago. This ancestor would have been one of the few surviving males during this catastrophic event, his genetic lineage continuing through the generations. But the genetic consequences were not the only ones. The Y chromosome bottleneck also had social and cultural ramifications. In the aftermath of this event, early human societies may have undergone significant changes in their social structures. As males became fewer in number, the roles they played within their communities would have shifted. The dynamics of leadership, governance, and family structures may have been altered as a result, with females potentially taking on more prominent roles in decision-making and survival strategies. In fact, some anthropologists suggest that early human societies may have had more egalitarian social structures before the bottleneck, with a greater degree of cooperation between the sexes. This shift may have also had implications for the development of early religious beliefs and practices. As males became more scarce, their role as protectors and providers may have been elevated to a sacred status. In many ancient cultures, the male figure was associated with strength, power, and protection, and this may have been a reflection of the reduced number of males in society. It is possible that early myths and religious stories began to take shape around these themes, with male deities representing the strength and resilience of the surviving few. The Y chromosome bottleneck also provides a fascinating glimpse into the resilience of the human species. Despite the odds stacked against them, humanity managed to survive and thrive, spreading across the globe and developing into the diverse cultures and civilizations we know today. The struggle for survival in those early days may have been brutal and unforgiving, but it shaped the very essence of what it means to be human. The survivors of this ancient conflict laid the groundwork for the societies that would eventually build empires, explore new continents, and create the world we live in today. Yet, as we ponder the legacy of this forgotten war, we must also ask, what other catastrophic events in human history have shaped our genetic and cultural in ways we have yet to fully understand? Are there other wars, disasters, or changes in the environment that left such deep scars on our collective history that we have failed to recognize them? And perhaps most intriguingly, what other secrets lie hidden in the depths of prehistoric time, waiting to be uncovered? As we approach the conclusion of this ancient and forgotten war that nearly wiped out the male population of early humans, it is essential to explore the final impact of the Y chromosome bottleneck on the course of human history. By now, we have understood that this catastrophe, likely caused by a combination of environmental stress, warfare, disease, and social shifts, dramatically altered the trajectory of human evolution. But how did this event shape the development of modern humans? What lessons can we learn from the way our ancestors survived and adapted to such a catastrophic event? The genetic effects of the Y chromosome bottleneck are perhaps the most enduring legacy of this prehistoric war. As we discussed in the previous sections, the dramatic reduction in the male population meant that only a small fraction of males passed on their Y chromosomes to future generations. This is why even today, all human males share a common ancestor, Y chromosomal Adam, whose genetic line continues through the ages. This bottleneck has had a lasting effect on human genetics, reducing the diversity of the Y chromosome and leaving behind a relatively narrow genetic pool from which the majority of modern men are descended. While this event may have significantly reduced male genetic diversity, it did not spell the end for human survival. In fact, it is a testament to the resilience of early humans that they were able to adapt, rebuild, and continue their existence despite such a dramatic loss. In a sense, this event illustrates the power of human adaptability and the strength of the human spirit. Even in the face of what seemed like an insurmountable challenge, humanity managed to persist, evolve, and eventually thrive. But what about the social and cultural impact of the Y chromosome bottleneck? How did this event shape early human societies in ways that still influence us today? While much of the ancient world remains a mystery, there is evidence to suggest that the aftermath of this bottleneck led to significant shifts in social structures and gender roles. As males became scarcer, early human communities may have had to adopt more cooperative and egalitarian structures to ensure survival. This may have resulted in a greater balance between the roles of men and women in society, with both sexes contributing more equally to the survival of the group. Furthermore, the rarity of males may have elevated their status within early societies. In many ancient cultures, the idea of a male protector, one who could provide for and defend the group, became central to societal values. This shift in social dynamics may have influenced early religious and cultural beliefs, with male gods and figures representing strength, leadership, and survival. The role of males as protectors and warriors was likely idealized and enshrined in myths and stories that were passed down through generations. Another fascinating aspect of this ancient struggle is its potential influence on the development of early human technology. As early humans adapted to their new reality, the scarcity of males may have spurred innovations in tools and strategies that helped the survivors cope with the changing environment. For example, the development of early farming techniques may have been a direct result of the need for more stable and sustainable food sources. The invention of agriculture allowed early human societies to settle in one place, reducing the need for constant hunting and warfare. As a result, this shift in lifestyle may have contributed to the eventual rise of more complex societies, where technology and trade played an increasingly important role. While much of this story remains speculative, one thing is certain: the Y chromosome bottleneck was a defining event in human history. It not only shaped the genetic of modern humans, but also influenced the development of social structures, religious beliefs, and technological advancements. The survivors of this ancient war laid the foundation for the societies that would eventually build empires, explore new continents, and create the modern world we know today. But what can we learn from this ancient event as we look to the future? The Y chromosome bottleneck serves as a reminder of the fragility of human existence. Despite our technological advancements and global interconnectedness, we are still vulnerable to the forces of nature, disease, and conflict. The challenges faced by our ancestors, though vastly different in scale, echo the challenges we face today. In an age of climate change, geopolitical instability, and global health crises, the resilience of early humans offers a valuable lesson in adaptability and survival. Moreover, this story challenges us to reconsider our understanding of history. While many historical narratives focus on grand events, wars, revolutions, and the rise and fall of empires, the everyday struggles of ordinary people often go unnoticed. It is in these forgotten moments, such as the prehistoric war that nearly wiped out the male population, that we can find the true essence of human history: resilience, survival, and the quiet determination to carry on. As we reflect on the story of the Y chromosome bottleneck, we are left with a final question: what other forgotten events, small yet significant, have shaped the world we live in today? What hidden stories are waiting to be uncovered, offering new insights into the human experience and the forces that have shaped our evolution? The past, it seems, is full of mysteries, some of which may never be fully understood. But it is through these mysteries, the quiet battles of survival, that we gain a deeper appreciation for the resilience of humanity and the unexpected outcomes that have led us to where we are now. As we shift our focus from the forgotten prehistoric war to another forgotten chapter in human history, we find ourselves confronted with an event that, much like the Y chromosome bottleneck, had profound and lasting consequences on the development of human societies. This event is not as widely recognized or remembered as the plagues that decimated civilizations, such as the Black Death in the Middle Ages. Yet it holds an equally critical place in the early story of humanity, the silent plague that swept through the ancient world, killing off nearly 94% of men and reshaping the course of human evolution in ways we are only beginning to understand. Unlike the infamous plagues of history, this one was not marked by waves of infected bodies falling into the streets or the unmistakable signs of an airborne virus wreaking havoc on entire populations. No, this plague was quiet, insidious, and largely unnoticed in the annals of history, perhaps because it struck long before written records were kept. It was not a plague in the conventional sense, but rather a genetic and social phenomenon that played out over millennia, with consequences that were felt not just in ancient communities, but are still embedded in the human genome today. This silent plague, which scientists refer to as the Y chromosome bottleneck, represents a time when the male population of early human societies was nearly wiped out. While it is commonly associated with the catastrophic prehistoric war we discussed in the first story, the silent plague was a separate event that had its own distinct causes and ramifications. It is important to note that this event did not result in the immediate, dramatic deaths that we often associate with plagues. Instead, it unfolded slowly and quietly, through a combination of environmental, social, and genetic factors that contributed to the gradual extinction of the male Y chromosome line. At the heart of the silent plague was a combination of environmental catastrophe and social upheaval. Genetic studies suggest that early human populations went through a severe population bottleneck, where only a small fraction of men survived and passed on their genetic material. But what caused this near-extinction event? Was it a series of devastating environmental changes, such as a volcanic eruption, an ice age, or a prolonged drought? Or was it the consequence of human actions, the onset of warfare, disease, and overhunting, that pushed the human population to the brink? One theory posits that this silent plague coincided with a catastrophic shift in climate, a time when the Earth's temperature fluctuated wildly, creating extreme weather patterns that caused widespread crop failure and famine. The scarcity of food, combined with the increased competition for mates, would have led to intense selection pressures on early human populations. It is at this point that the male population began to dwindle, as fewer and fewer men were able to secure mates, and those who did were often the most genetically fit or the most resourceful. At the same time, the role of women in these societies may have shifted, allowing them to adapt in ways that men could not. Early human societies were already organized around a division of, with men primarily responsible for hunting and women tasked with gathering, food preparation, and childcare. However, in times of scarcity, women may have been more resourceful in their survival, particularly as they often had access to a more varied diet. The collapse of male-dominated hunting societies, in which men would have competed fiercely for territory and mates, may have indirectly allowed for the increased survival and prominence of women, who were able to bear children and raise them in more stable, albeit less physically demanding, environments. The impact of the silent plague, while not immediately apparent in the fossil record, can still be observed today in the genetic structure of modern human populations. Studies of Y chromosome DNA reveal a stark and puzzling fact. All human males share a common ancestor from a relatively recent time in history, about 200,000 years ago, much more recently than would be expected given the size and diversity of early human populations. This suggests that a single, very small population of males passed on their Y chromosomes, while the vast majority of other male lines perished during this silent plague. But how did this happen? Were these survivors simply or was there a random, luck-based element involved? Genetic research has shown that, rather than an isolated event of male deaths due to disease or violence, it was more likely that the Y chromosome bottleneck resulted from a complex interplay of social dynamics and environmental stresses. The male population that survived may have been more genetically uniform, having been the only men able to secure mates or survive long enough to pass on their genetic material. What makes this silent plague especially intriguing is how it can be viewed as both a genetic catastrophe and a moment of human resilience. While it wiped out much of the genetic diversity of early males, it also led to the survival of a few powerful genetic lines that would go on to dominate the course of human evolution. These surviving Y chromosome lines, representing the few men who could reproduce and pass on their genes, became the foundation for the genetic inheritance of modern human males. But even more striking is how this event might have subtly shaped the social structures of early human communities. Did the reduction in the number of available males lead to the elevation of their status? Were men seen as more valuable, their roles as protectors and providers becoming more revered? The societal structures that arose in the wake of this silent plague would have been influenced by this scarcity, shaping the roles of men and women in ways that have continued to affect human societies throughout history. So what was the end result of this silent plague? It was not an instant or dramatic event, but rather one that unfolded slowly over time, changing the course of human evolution and culture. Today, we may never fully understand the depth of its impact, but the evidence is clear. The human population was severely reduced by an unknown event, and only a fraction of early males passed on their genetic legacy. As we reflect on this mysterious chapter in human history, one key question remains. If the silent plague was not the result of a single catastrophic event, but rather a slow, gradual process, how many other quiet, unnoticed events throughout history have shaped the course of our evolution, leaving us with more questions than answers? As we continue to explore the silent plague that reshaped early human populations, it's crucial to delve deeper into the potential factors that made this event so catastrophic for male humans. While the bottleneck in male genetic diversity is well documented, the causes behind this drastic reduction in the male population are still the subject of much debate among scholars. What exactly triggered this near-extermination of early men? Was it the result of a specific environmental disaster, or was it a combination of factors that led to this genetic catastrophe? One of the most commonly proposed causes for this silent plague is environmental upheaval. The Earth has undergone dramatic climatic shifts throughout its history, and it's likely that early human populations were heavily impacted by these changes. During the periods when the Y chromosome bottleneck occurred, around 70,000 years ago, scientists speculate that humans may have been living through a series of extreme weather events. These could have included volcanic eruptions that blanketed the planet in ash, triggering what is known as a volcanic winter, or rapid shifts between warm and cold periods that disrupted ecosystems. In fact, evidence points to the eruption of the supervolcano in Indonesia around 74,000 years ago, a catastrophic event that is believed to have significantly altered the Earth's climate. The eruption was so powerful that it may have lowered global temperatures for several years, creating an environment of food scarcity, longer winters, and overall instability. This kind of environmental stress could have been catastrophic for early human populations, as the available food resources dwindled and survival became increasingly difficult. The combination of a weakened food supply and harsh environmental conditions would have placed immense pressure on early human societies. Survival would have depended on the ability to adapt, to find new food sources, and to fight off predators and diseases. But as we've seen with the Y chromosome bottleneck, this pressure likely led to the culling of the male population. Males, being primarily responsible for hunting and would have been the first to experience the toll of such environmental stresses, they may have had to compete for mates more fiercely, and with fewer resources available, only the most successful men would have survived. Additionally, disease could have played a major role in decimating early male populations. Although the exact pathogens involved are unknown, it is possible that early humans were vulnerable to diseases that spread rapidly under the stressed conditions of their environment. Just as modern humans face the threat of new diseases in crowded cities, and during times of environmental or social upheaval, early human populations were similarly at risk. The male population, already under pressure from starvation and competition, may have been more susceptible to the effects of disease. But what makes this part of the silent plague especially intriguing is the possible role of human in the decline of the male population. If early human societies had already begun forming social structures and divisions of especially between men and women, then the changing environment could have altered these structures. The roles of men and women, which were originally distinct but complementary, may have shifted in response to the new pressures placed on early human groups. As men became scarcer, their role in society could have become more symbolic, their value elevated due to their increasing rarity. This shift in gender dynamics may have been one of the factors contributing to the prominence of men in early human mythologies, as their value in society became tied not only to their ability to hunt and provide, but also to their increasing scarcity. It is plausible that early human cultures began to deify male figures, creating myths and stories of male protectors, warriors, and ancestors. Such myths would have helped to reinforce the critical role that men played in society, and perhaps provided a sense of unity during a time of crisis. Another factor that could have contributed to the silent plague was the gradual social changes brought on by early agriculture. As humans transitioned from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agricultural societies, the dynamics of human survival began to shift. The introduction of farming would have decreased the need for men to engage in constant hunting, warfare, and competition for resources. Farming and food production became more stable, but it also required a different set of skills and knowledge, skills that were often more equally distributed between men and women. The decline in the importance of traditional male roles, particularly in hunting and defending the community, may have led to a decrease in male competition. With fewer men needed to provide for families, the pressure on them to engage in violent competition may have diminished. This shift could have played a role in the gradual decrease in male population, as those who were less suited to agricultural life, those who still relied on physical prowess and violence, may have been edged out by the evolving social structures of early human societies. The silent plague, then, was not a sudden event, but a slow, grinding process that unfolded over centuries. It wasn't a war with swords and shields, but a battle of survival against an ever-changing environment, coupled with shifting social roles and a complex interplay of genetics, culture, and the bottleneck that reduced male genetic diversity in early human populations was a result of these multifaceted pressures, creating a scenario in which only a handful of men survived to pass on their genes to future generations. As we continue to examine this period of human history, we are left with a number of compelling questions. Was the silent plague truly the result of a natural catastrophe, or was human, such as warfare, overhunting, or the pressures of competition, equally responsible for the dramatic reduction in the male population? Can we trace the origins of early social structures back to this time, when the survival of men was tied to their increasing rarity and importance? And perhaps most intriguingly, how did these factors influence the development of early religious systems, with their emphasis on the protection and survival of the male lineage? The silent plague may have been an invisible force in history, but its effects are still felt today in the genetic diversity of modern humans. As we ponder its full implications, we are forced to confront the ways in which our ancestors' struggles for survival shaped the world we live in today. As we near the conclusion of this examination into the silent plague that nearly eradicated early human males, we must step back and consider its long-term consequences. While the immediate effects of the Y chromosome bottleneck were severe, resulting in a dramatic reduction in male genetic diversity, the ripple effects of this event were felt far beyond the limits of its time. The way in which early humans adapted to survive in the aftermath of the silent plague played a pivotal role in shaping the course of human history, and the traces of this event are still visible in our genetic, social structures, and cultural traditions today. The genetic consequences of the silent plague were profound. The fact that nearly all living human males share a common male ancestor, Y chromosomal Adam, provides a clear indication of the magnitude of the bottleneck that took place. This ancestor, who lived roughly 200,000 years ago, represents a small group of men who were fortunate enough to survive the genetic culling that occurred during the silent plague. The majority of male ancestors, whose genes did not make it through, left no lasting legacy in the genetic pool. This event essentially caused a major reduction in the diversity of the Y chromosome, a genetic feature passed only through the male lineage. What does this mean for us today? It means that every modern human male, regardless of ethnicity or nationality, shares an extremely limited set of male genetic markers. This genetic unity among males is a testament to the bottleneck that occurred during this period and the eventual survival of a small population of males. As a result, the male genetic legacy that continues today is much narrower than that of females, who have a far more diverse genetic inheritance, thanks to the broader contribution of mitochondrial DNA passed from mothers to offspring. The genetic homogeneity of males serves as a reminder of the near-extinction event that nearly wiped out our male ancestors, a silent catastrophe that has defined human genetics ever since. However, while the silent plague left a lasting genetic imprint, it also played a significant role in reshaping early human societies. The scarcity of men likely altered the very fabric of human social structures. With fewer males available for reproduction, the role of men in early societies would have changed. Men may have been revered as protectors and warriors, but they were also elevated to a kind of symbolic status. Their increased rarity likely made them more valuable and sought after as mates, and this social pressure may have intensified the competitive nature of early human males, further reinforcing their need to secure resources and reproductive rights. This shift in social dynamics may also have had profound implications for early human religious and cultural beliefs. In many ancient societies, the role of men was mythologized, often with male figures representing power, strength, and protection. This could have been a direct result of their increased value as survivors in the wake of the silent plague. The scarcity of men may have led to the deification of male figures in early religions and cultures, where they were cast as gods, kings, and heroes who overcame great odds to ensure the survival of their people. The stories and myths surrounding these male figures likely had their roots in the real struggles early human communities faced during the silent plague, when male survival became synonymous with the continuation of the species. The scarcity of men may have also changed the roles of women in society. As men became fewer in number, women likely took on more critical roles in maintaining and the survival of the group. With the shift away from hunting and warfare to farming and resource gathering, women would have been central to the stability of early societies. Women's survival skills, including the gathering of plant-based food, of children, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions, may have ensured their survival during the silent plague. As a result, this event may have played a role in the emergence of more egalitarian or balanced social structures, where both men and women contributed more equally to the group's overall survival. While these social changes were undoubtedly important, the silent plague also contributed to the broader trajectory of human technological and cultural development. As early humans faced increasing pressures to adapt and survive, new innovations in tool-making, agriculture, and social organization emerged. The transition from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural ones would have been heavily influenced by the need for stability and the survival of the few remaining males. With fewer men engaged in hunting and more involved in farming, societies would have shifted toward more sedentary lifestyles, laying the foundation for the rise of early civilizations. Yet, even as we explore these long-term changes, one thing remains certain. The silent plague did not just reshape human genetics or social structures, it reshaped the very way we understand history. In the grand narrative of human civilization, the silent plague is often overlooked, buried beneath the well-known tales of war, empire-building, and technological innovation. However, the impact of this hidden event is undeniable. It was a catastrophe that nearly wiped out an entire gender, and in doing so, it altered the course of human evolution in ways that we are still grappling with today. The silent plague was not an event that we can easily quantify or fully comprehend. It was a quiet, slow-moving disaster that affected every facet of early human life, from genetic diversity to social dynamics. The few surviving males who passed on their genes were not necessarily the strongest or the most successful in the traditional sense. They were simply the ones who happened to survive the environmental, social, and genetic challenges of the time. As we look back on this forgotten event, it raises a broader, more profound question. How many other pivotal moments in human history have been shaped by such silent, invisible forces? Just as the silent plague reshaped the course of human evolution, are there other hidden moments in our past that continue to influence who we are today? And perhaps most strikingly, what other forgotten stories are waiting to be uncovered, stories that have long been overshadowed by the more dramatic and well-known events of history? The silent plague, while an obscure and often overlooked chapter in human history, offers us an important lesson. It reminds us that history is not always made up of grand battles and revolutions. Sometimes, it is shaped by the quiet, unseen forces that affect us on a genetic, social, and cultural level. The survival of the few and the lasting impact of those invisible events can leave an indelible mark on the course of humanity. In the grand arc of human history, there are moments that radically shift the trajectory of the species, yet remain remarkably underappreciated in their significance. One such moment is the advent of agriculture, a slow and deliberate transition that began around 12,000 years ago. This shift marked the end of humanity's dependence on the unpredictable rhythms of hunting and gathering, and the beginning of an era where humans began to sow seeds for not only crops, but also for the rise of complex societies. The choice of seeds over spears may seem trivial at first glance, but in truth, it was one of the most transformative decisions ever made by humankind. Before agriculture, humans were primarily hunter-gatherers. They moved across the landscape in small nomadic groups, foraging for food and hunting wild animals. While this way of life was efficient in its own right, it required constant movement and a deep understanding of the natural world. Survival was a delicate balance, and it relied heavily on the availability of food in the environment. But as the planet's climate began to change after the last ice age, the conditions that once supported abundant wild game and plant life started to shift. The once plentiful herds of animals began to dwindle, and the environments that supported them became less stable. It was in this time of environmental uncertainty that humans began to experiment with something that had been practiced by their ancestors for millennia: the cultivation of plants. While early humans had long gathered wild grains, fruits, and nuts, the deliberate planting of crops was a radical departure from their usual way of life. The transition from hunting and gathering to farming wasn't a sudden revolution, but rather a gradual and hesitant evolution. Over thousands of years, early humans learned to plant seeds, nurture them, and harvest the resulting crops. This move from reliance on wild foods to the management of crops marked the birth of agriculture and the beginning of a new era for humankind. The process was, however, far from simple. It was a slow and arduous journey, fraught with challenges. The forms of agriculture were small-scale and rudimentary. Early humans experimented with a variety of plants, seeking to domesticate those that were easiest to cultivate and yielded the greatest return. The first crops were likely wheat, barley, and other grains, which were well suited to the temperate climates of the Near East, specifically in the Fertile Crescent. This was the birthplace of what we now call the Neolithic Revolution. But why did early humans turn to farming in the first place? Why did they choose seeds over spears, as it were? The answer lies in the changing environment. As the last ice age receded, the climate began to warm, and the planet entered what is known as the Holocene epoch. The warmer temperatures allowed for the growth of more stable and diverse plant life, but at the same time, it created new challenges. With larger, sedentary communities emerging, there was a need for a reliable and stable food source that could support these growing populations. In the face of dwindling game and unreliable hunting grounds, early humans began to realize that they could cultivate food more efficiently by planting it themselves. This move toward agriculture allowed humans to exert more control over their food supply and settle into one location. No longer did they need to follow migrating herds of animals or rely on seasonal foraging. Instead, they could build permanent settlements, with food produced locally in predictable cycles. At first, farming was an extension of existing practices. Humans would gather wild grains, scatter some of the seeds near their settlements, and wait for the plants to grow. It wasn't much of a leap from this early practice to the development of fully cultivated fields. Over time, humans learned how to select the best seeds, improve crop yields, and cultivate larger areas of land. This shift from a mobile, hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a sedentary, agrarian one allowed for population growth, the creation of permanent settlements, and the rise of early villages and towns. However, the shift to farming wasn't universally accepted or easy. Not every group of humans immediately embraced agriculture, and many continued to live as hunter-gatherers for centuries after agriculture became widespread in other parts of the world. For some, the risks of relying on a single food source were too great, and the intensive nature of farming was daunting. The early agriculturalists faced a variety of challenges, from unpredictable weather patterns to pest infestations. Farming was no guarantee of success, and crop failure could lead to widespread starvation. Yet despite these challenges, farming eventually proved to be a more sustainable and reliable way of life. As farming became more established, humans began to innovate. They developed irrigation techniques, invented tools for planting and harvesting, and created complex social structures to support the growing agricultural economy. With more food available, populations grew, and with larger populations came the need for organization, governance, and trade. Over time, the small agricultural villages that had once dotted the landscape began to grow into cities, and the world was irrevocably changed. But what were the broader impacts of this transition? How did choosing seeds over spears affect the course of human history? While the immediate benefits of farming were clear, more stable food sources, larger populations, and permanent settlements, the long-term consequences were far-reaching. The move toward agriculture didn't just change how people ate, it changed the very fabric of human society. With the advent of farming came the emergence of new social hierarchies. As some individuals and groups gained access to the most fertile land, wealth and power began to accumulate in the hands of a few. This shift paved the way for the rise of social stratification, with some people living in relative luxury while others in the fields. This division also marked the beginning of the inequality that would come to define many human societies throughout history. The surplus food created by farming allowed for specialization with some individuals working as traders or leaders, while others toiled in the fields. Furthermore, the rise of agriculture led to the establishment of permanent settlements and the eventual rise of cities and states. Early agricultural societies were able to support larger populations, which in turn required more complex systems of governance and organization. These early cities became centers of culture, trade, and political power, and they laid the groundwork for the development of advanced civilizations in the millennia to follow. Perhaps one of the most significant consequences of the advent of farming was its impact on human. The shift to agriculture required immense physical, and the introduction of tools and technology made this more efficient. But with this efficiency came a shift in human relationships with work. While hunting and gathering required a more egalitarian division farming introduced new social roles and hierarchical structures. The agricultural revolution not only shaped how people lived, but also how they worked and who controlled the work. The question now is, as we look back on this ancient decision to choose seeds over spears, what can we learn about the evolution of human society? How did this shift, so seemingly simple yet profound, change the trajectory of our species? And perhaps more importantly, how does it continue to shape the world we live in today? The rise of agriculture was the foundation upon which all modern civilizations were built, and understanding its origins helps us better comprehend the complexities of our own society. As we continue our exploration of the dawn of farming, we now turn our attention to the profound and far-reaching effects that the shift from hunting and gathering to agricultural societies had on human development. While Section 1 focused on the initial reasons for the adoption of agriculture and its immediate impact on early human societies, Section 2 delves into the deeper, longer-term consequences of this monumental shift. One of the most significant changes brought about by the rise of farming was the transition from a nomadic existence to permanent settlements. Before agriculture, human populations lived in small, mobile groups, constantly moving in search of food. The daily rhythm of life revolved around hunting, fishing, and gathering wild plants, people to adapt constantly to the natural environment. Life was often unpredictable, with food sources dependent on the seasons and the movements of wild animals. The advent of agriculture, however, allowed humans to break free from this cycle. For the first time in history, people could stay in one place year-round, cultivating the land and growing food in a predictable cycle. This change was not just a shift in lifestyle, but also a profound alteration of how people viewed their relationship to the land. No longer were they dependent on the wild and uncertain rhythms of nature. Instead, they became active participants in shaping their environment. They began to domesticate plants and animals, carefully selecting those best suited to the environment in a way that ensured a reliable food source. The process of cultivating crops and raising livestock gave rise to larger, more complex communities. As settlements grew, they required more organization and cooperation. Early human societies began to form around shared agricultural interests, and this led to the development of new social structures. Instead of small, egalitarian groups where everyone had relatively equal roles, agricultural societies tended to hierarchy and specialization. With the advent of surplus food, some people were freed from the constant of farming and could focus on other tasks, such as tool-making, trading, and leadership. This specialization was one of the key innovations that agriculture introduced to human societies. In a hunter-gatherer society, everyone played a role in obtaining food, and there was little room for people to develop skills outside of that sphere. But with farming, the surplus food produced by the land allowed certain individuals to focus on crafts, trade, and governance. This was the birth of social stratification, where different people performed different roles in society, some with greater wealth, power, and influence than others. The first divisions were established as people began to work not just for survival, but for the accumulation of wealth and resources. With the rise of permanent settlements and more complex social structures came the development of more advanced forms of governance. Early agricultural societies required leaders to manage the land, ensure food distribution, and settle disputes. The need for organization and protection led to the formation of early political systems. In some areas, tribal councils or elders guided the decisions of the community, while in others, early forms of kingship or chieftaincy emerged. These systems were a direct result of the need to manage growing populations and the increasing complexity of human society. While the political and social changes brought about by agriculture were profound, they were not without consequences. The rise of permanent settlements led to increased conflict over resources. As populations grew, the pressure to control fertile land became more intense, and competition between neighboring groups often turned into violent conflict. These early clashes were not limited to agricultural societies, but extended to nomadic groups as well. The competition for territory, food, and resources would ultimately set the stage for the rise of empires, kingdoms, and states throughout the ancient world. Agriculture also had a profound impact on the way humans interacted with the environment. While early humans had been hunter-gatherers, constantly moving and working with nature, the advent of farming marked the beginning of an era in which humans began to alter the land in more permanent ways. The process of clearing forests for farming, diverting rivers for irrigation, and selecting specific crops for cultivation all represented significant shifts in human environmental impact. Over time, these practices would lead to deforestation, soil depletion, and the alteration of ecosystems that continue to affect us today. Perhaps the most striking consequence of agriculture, however, was the population explosion it set into motion. By providing a more stable and predictable food supply, farming enabled humans to settle in one place and raise larger families. With more food available, people lived longer, and the population began to grow rapidly. Whereas hunter-gatherers typically lived in small groups of a few dozen people, early agricultural communities could support populations numbering in the hundreds or even thousands. As farming practices improved and societies became more organized, populations exploded, eventually leading to the rise of the first cities and the dawn of civilization. This population growth, while beneficial in terms of providing for agriculture and supporting more complex societies, also introduced new challenges. Overcrowding in early settlements led to the spread of disease. In fact, the close proximity in which humans began to live, combined with the domestication of animals, created the perfect conditions for the spread of infectious diseases. Diseases that had once been confined to wild animals now had the opportunity to jump from animal to human, leading to outbreaks of illness that could decimate entire communities. In addition to these health challenges, the development of cities and the growth of human populations created social inequalities. While farming allowed for greater wealth accumulation, it also meant that some people gained more control over resources than others. Those who controlled the land or the surplus food were able to accumulate wealth, while those who did not were often left in poverty. This created the first true class divisions in human history, setting the stage for the social and economic hierarchies that would characterize human societies for millennia. Despite the challenges posed by early agriculture, there is no doubt that the transition from hunting and gathering to farming marked a pivotal moment in human history. This shift laid the foundation for the rise of cities, states, and empires, and it set in motion the social, economic, and political changes that would shape the course of civilization. The decision to choose seeds over spears, to settle down and domesticate plants and animals, was not merely an innovation, it was a transformative choice that altered the course of human destiny. But as we reflect on the dawn of farming, we must ask, what lessons can we learn from this ancient decision? How did this choice, this first step towards civilization, shape the way we live today? And perhaps most importantly, as we face challenges in our own world, what can we take from the experiences of our agricultural ancestors? The rise of agriculture was the beginning of our long journey into the world of cities and states, but it was also the beginning of our relationship with the environment, one that we must continue to navigate as we move forward. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration of the dawn of farming, it becomes clear that the transition from hunting and gathering to settled agricultural societies was not only a dramatic shift in how humans acquired food, but also a profound transformation in how we interacted with one another, the environment, and the very course of history itself. This change, rooted in the decision to embrace seeds over spears, was the catalyst for the emergence of civilizations, the establishment of cities, and the birth of complex social, economic, and political systems. Looking back, it is easy to view agriculture as an inevitable step in the development of human societies, an advancement that made perfect sense given the changing environment and the pressures of population growth. Yet, in reality, the decision to shift from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a sedentary agricultural one was not without its risks. The first farmers had no guarantee that their efforts would be successful. The unpredictability of climate, the threat of crop failure, and the intensive nature of agriculture could have spelled disaster. And yet, these early agriculturalists were driven by the need for stability, predictability, and the desire to build a future for their communities. The first settled agricultural communities represented a new way of life, one that was bound by the rhythms of planting and harvesting, by the cycles of the seasons, and by the dependence on the land. But this new relationship with the land also marked the beginning of humanity's ability to shape the environment to suit its needs. Whereas hunter-gatherers worked with nature, adapting to it and following the movements of animals and plants, early farmers began to alter nature to suit their needs. Clearing forests for farmland, irrigating arid lands, and domesticating animals were some of the signs of humanity's growing influence on the natural world. These actions, though born out of necessity, laid the groundwork for the environmental challenges we face today. The ability to control food production was revolutionary. With agriculture, communities could produce more food than ever before, allowing for population growth, the rise of permanent settlements, and the development of trade. As farming spread, so did the ability of human societies to support larger and more complex populations. The surplus food generated by agriculture provided the foundation for specialization, where people could focus on tasks other than food production, creating tools, making pottery, building homes, and engaging in trade. This was the beginning of the division of, and with it, the rise of distinct social roles. As communities grew and became more complex, they needed systems of governance to manage resources, settle disputes, and maintain order. The surplus food from agriculture not only fed larger populations, but also allowed for the rise of elites and the consolidation of wealth. This created the first hierarchical societies, where some individuals gained control over the food supply land, and while others were left to work the fields or trade goods. These early hierarchies laid the foundation for the systems of governance, class divisions, and economic systems that would dominate human history for millennia. The rise of agriculture also set the stage for the development of cities, which would become the centers of culture, trade, and power in the ancient world. The cities, such as those in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, were built around fertile agricultural lands. These cities became hubs of innovation, where new technologies were developed, where writing systems were invented, and where the first forms of complex governance emerged. These urban centers would eventually give rise to great civilizations, whose achievements in art, science, architecture, and philosophy would shape the course of history. However, with the growth of cities and civilizations came new challenges. The rise of agriculture led to the establishment of permanent settlements, but it also created conditions for overcrowding, environmental degradation, and the spread of disease. As populations increased, so did the need for resources, and competition for fertile land and water became fierce. Early human societies began to engage in warfare over territory, and with the advent of new technologies and organized armies, these conflicts became increasingly violent and complex. Agriculture had given rise to prosperity, but it also contributed to the inequalities and tensions that would characterize human societies for centuries. The relationship between humans and the environment, which had once been characterized by a balance between hunter-gatherer groups and the natural world, began to shift. The impact of human activity on the land became more pronounced as agriculture expanded. Deforestation, soil erosion, and the depletion of natural resources became pressing concerns, though these issues were not fully recognized by early societies. The desire for more land and more food often led to the environment, a trend that would continue throughout history. Perhaps the most important consequence of the shift to farming was its impact on the way humans viewed time. Whereas hunter-gatherers lived more in tune with the natural cycles of the seasons, agriculture imposed a new sense of regularity and control over time. The cycles of planting and harvesting created a predictable rhythm to life, which was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed societies to plan for the future, to store surplus food, and to build larger, more stable communities. But it also created an intense reliance on the land and the seasons, and a failure in one cycle could lead to disaster. Droughts, floods, and other environmental disasters became existential threats to early agricultural societies. And yet, despite the challenges, the choice to embrace agriculture laid the foundation for the incredible achievements of human civilization. It gave rise to cities, empires, and technologies that would eventually span the globe. It provided a means for humans to settle in one place and build the foundations of modern society. The shift from hunting and gathering to farming was not just an economic or technological change. It was a cultural and social revolution that fundamentally altered the way humans related to one another and to the world around them. As we look back on the dawn of farming, it is clear that the choice to choose seeds over spears was not just a pivotal moment in human history. It was the beginning of everything that came after. The rise of agriculture set humanity on a path towards civilization, but it also marked the beginning of our long, complex relationship with the environment and the challenges that arise when we alter the natural world to meet our needs. In reflecting on the journey from the early days of agriculture to the complexities of modern life, we are reminded of the resilience of humanity. Our ancestors, in their quiet determination to sow seeds and build societies, laid the groundwork for the world we live in today. Yet, as we continue to face new challenges, whether they be environmental, social, or political, it is worth asking, what can we learn from their journey? How can we ensure that the legacy of agriculture continues to serve humanity without repeating the mistakes of the past? In the grand sweep of history, there are moments that stand out, moments of revolution, of uprising, and of societal change that forever alter the course of human civilization. When we think of the 19th century, it is easy to focus on the high-profile events: the French Revolution, the American Civil War, the rise of industrialization, and the spread of nationalism. Yet beyond these major milestones, there were quieter, more unnoticed revolutions that were just as significant in shaping the world we know today. The long road to emancipation, whether through the abolition of slavery, the rise of women's rights, or the fight for reform, was a complex and winding path, driven by both visible and invisible forces. The 19th century was a time of dramatic transformation. In Europe and the Americas, societies were being reshaped by economic, political, and social forces that would redefine the concepts of freedom and equality. For millions of people, the 19th century was a time of both progress and struggle. The dawn of industrialization and the spread of democracy provided new opportunities, but they also brought with them new challenges, inequalities, and injustices. This was the century in which the fight for emancipation took many forms: the abolition of slavery, the suffrage movements, the rise of trade unions, and the fight for social reform. At the heart of these movements was the idea of human rights, the belief that all people, regardless of race, gender, or class, should be free to live their lives with dignity and opportunity. The quest for freedom, however, was not an easy one. For many, emancipation was not achieved through grand revolutions or dramatic moments of resistance, but through the slow, painstaking work of raising awareness, changing minds, and challenging deeply ingrained systems of power and privilege. One of the most significant and widely recognized movements of the 19th century was the abolition of slavery. In the Americas, the abolition of slavery was the culmination of centuries of struggle by enslaved people and their allies. The legacy of slavery had been entrenched in both the economy and culture of the United States, the Caribbean, and much of Latin America. For generations, millions of African men, women, and children were forced into brutal, separated from their families, and denied the most basic human rights. The fight to end this institution was long and hard fought, and while it was ultimately successful in most parts of the Americas by the mid-19th century, it was not a simple or straightforward process. Abolition movement in the United States reached its climax with the Civil War, but it had been building for decades before. Abolitionists such as William Garrison had long called for an end to the institution of slavery, but their voices were often drowned out by the powerful interests who benefited from the enslaved people. The movement gained momentum in the 1830s and 1840s, as more and more people recognized the moral and economic contradictions of slavery. However, it was only through years of struggle, political, and the ultimate sacrifice of millions of lives that slavery was finally abolished in the United States in 1865. But the abolition of slavery was not the only form of emancipation in the 19th century. At the same time, the 19th century saw the rise of movements for women's rights. Women, long excluded from the political and economic systems of most societies, began to demand greater rights and opportunities. The fight for suffrage, the right to vote, was one of the central goals of these movements. In both Europe and the United States, women began to organize and demand the same political rights as men. The first wave of feminism, which began in the mid-19th century, focused on issues such as education, property rights, and most importantly, the right to vote. In the United States, women like Susan B. Anthony led the charge for suffrage. Their activism was met with resistance, and their fight for voting rights was slow and often bitter. The 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which granted women the right to vote, was not passed until 1920, but the seeds of this change were planted in the 19th century. Women's suffrage movements spread across the globe, eventually leading to significant changes in political systems and the recognition of women as full citizens with equal rights. Alongside the fight for women's rights was the growing movement for reform. As industrialization spread throughout Europe and North America, workers began to organize in response to the harsh conditions they faced in factories, mines, and workshops. The rise of capitalism had brought prosperity to many, but it had also created a class of workers who were exploited and underpaid. These workers often for long hours in dangerous conditions, with little regard for their safety or well-being. The movement sought to address these issues, advocating for better working conditions, higher wages, and shorter working hours. In the United States, the movement gained momentum in the late 19th century with the formation of unions like the American Federation of AFL and the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW. These organizations fought for better conditions and wages for workers, and while their efforts were often met with hostility from employers and the government, they laid the groundwork for the rights that many people take for granted today. The 19th century was also a time of social reform, as intellectuals and activists sought to address the inequalities that were entrenched in society. From the abolition of slavery to the rise of women's rights and reform, the struggles of the 19th century laid the foundation for the social and political changes that would define the 20th century. But these revolutions were not without their complexities. The road to emancipation was not always linear, and progress was often slow and hard-won. It was only through the tireless work of individuals and movements that these changes were made possible. While these revolutions were crucial in the fight for emancipation, they were not always recognized as such in their own time. Many of the people who fought for these causes, whether they were abolitionists, suffragists, or activists, were often marginalized, ignored, or, Yet, over time, their efforts and sacrifices would prove to be some of the most important in shaping the modern world. As we reflect on the long road to emancipation in the 19th century, we are left to consider the broader implications of these movements. What made these unnoticed revolutions so powerful, even in their obscurity? What does the gradual, often invisible progress toward emancipation teach us about the nature of social change? And perhaps most importantly, what lessons can we learn from these quiet revolutions as we continue to fight for freedom, equality, and justice in our own time? As we delve deeper into the unnoticed revolutions of the 19th century, it becomes clear that the social, political, and economic changes taking place during this period were more than just a series of isolated movements. Instead, they were interconnected and reflected a broader shift in how people viewed their rights, their roles in society, and their relationships with the structures of power. The quest for emancipation in the 19th century, whether through the abolition of slavery, the expansion of women's rights, or the fight for reform, was a struggle for dignity, autonomy, and justice. However, these movements were often met with fierce resistance and the entrenched interests of those who held power. The path to emancipation was not smooth or straightforward, but instead, it was a long, winding road that required persistence, sacrifice, and solidarity. One of the key challenges faced by those advocating for emancipation during the 19th century was the deeply ingrained systems of social hierarchy. The 19th century was still a time when aristocracies, colonial empires, and rigid class systems dominated much of the world. The idea that certain groups, whether enslaved people, women, or workers, should be treated as equals was a radical proposition. Many resisted these ideas, either because they benefited from the existing systems, or because they believed that social order required the subjugation of certain groups. The abolition of slavery was one of the most significant battles of the 19th century, but it was also one of the most bitterly contested. In the United States, slavery was not only a social institution, it was an economic one. The southern states, which relied heavily on slaves for the cultivation of cotton and tobacco, were deeply invested in maintaining the status. The abolition of slavery threatened not only the social fabric of the South, but also its economy. The political system of the United States was also divided, with the North and South at odds over the question of slavery. In the early 19th century, the abolitionist movement began to gain traction, particularly in the northern states. Figures like an escaped slave turned abolitionist and a conductor on the Underground Railroad played crucial roles in raising awareness about the horrors of slavery and advocating for its abolition. These activists often faced intense opposition, including threats of violence, legal repercussions, and public vilification. Yet, despite these obstacles, the abolitionist movement gained momentum. By the 1850s, the issue of slavery had become one of the central political issues in the United States, culminating in the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. The Civil War was not just a battle between the North and South over slavery, it was a struggle over the future of the nation and the moral foundations upon which it was built. The Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, issued by President Abraham Lincoln, declared all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory to be free, but it was not until the end of the war in 1865, with the passage of the 13th Amendment, that slavery was officially abolished in the United States. The abolition of slavery was a monumental victory for emancipation, but it did not mark the end of racial inequality or the struggles of formerly enslaved people. At the same time that abolition was being fought for in the United States, women in both Europe and the Americas were also fighting for their rights. The struggle for women's suffrage, which gained momentum in the 19th century, was another significant but often overlooked revolution. Women, who had long been excluded from political participation, began to demand the right to vote, the right to own property, and the right to be treated as equal citizens. The suffrage movement was not only about voting rights, it was about challenging deeply entrenched notions of gender and power. The first wave of feminism, which took place in the mid-19th century, was largely led by women who had been involved in other social justice movements, including the abolition of slavery. Figures like Susan B. in the United States and Pankhurst in the United Kingdom were instrumental in advocating for women's rights. These women and many others faced significant resistance from those who believed that women's place was in the home, not in the public sphere. The suffrage movement, much like the abolition movement, was a battle against deeply ingrained social norms that viewed certain people, particularly women, as subordinate. However, the suffrage movement was not an immediate success. Women had to fight for decades to be granted the right to vote, and it was only after years of activism, protests, and public debate that significant victories were achieved. In the United States, the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote, was passed in 1920, but the struggle for gender equality continued well into the 20th century. In the United Kingdom, women gained the right to vote in 1918, but full suffrage for women was not achieved until 1928. While these victories were crucial, they represented only the beginning of the broader struggle for gender equality, which continues today. In addition to the struggles for racial and gender equality, the 19th century was also a time of significant unrest. The rise of industrialization, while bringing about unprecedented economic growth and technological innovation, also led to the exploitation of workers. Factory workers, miners, and others often worked long hours under dangerous conditions for meager wages. The lack of protections and the exploitation of workers prompted the rise of unions and strikes, as workers began to demand better working conditions, higher wages, and the right to organize. The movement of the 19th century was a response to the growing inequality between the owners of capital and the working class. As industrial capitalism spread across Europe and North America, the gulf between rich and poor widened. Workers in factories, mines, and railroads were subjected to grueling conditions, with little regard for their safety or well-being. The first major strikes began to take place in the early 19th century, and by the mid-1800s, workers in many industries had begun to organize into unions to advocate for their rights. One of the most significant achievements of the movement was the establishment of the 8-hour workday. Workers, inspired by the successes of union organizing, fought for the right to work reasonable hours and to have time for rest and family life. These struggles, which were often met with violence and repression, ultimately laid the foundation for modern laws and workers' rights. These unnoticed revolutions of the 19th century, the abolition of slavery, the rise of women's rights, and the growth of movements, were not isolated events, but rather parts of a larger movement for human dignity and equality. While the victories were not always immediate or complete, they represented crucial steps in the long road to emancipation, a road that continues to this day. As we reflect on these struggles, we are reminded that the fight for emancipation is not always obvious or immediate. It is often a long, hard-fought battle that takes place in the shadows, far from the headlines. But it is through these struggles, however unnoticed, that true social change is achieved. The revolutions of the 19th century, though often ignored or overlooked, were among the most important in human history, setting the stage for the more visible revolutions of the 20th century and beyond. As we look to the future, the lessons of the 19th century's unnoticed revolutions are clear. The fight for freedom and equality is not just a matter of grand, public movements, but of tireless, often invisible work that pushes societies toward justice, dignity, and human rights. As we bring our exploration of the unnoticed revolutions of the 19th century to a close, it is important to reflect on the lasting impact these movements had on the world. The 19th century was a time of profound change, marked by the rise of new ideologies, technologies, and social structures. Yet, it was also a time when many of the struggles for basic human rights and dignity were waged in the shadows, quietly, slowly, but persistently. While the abolition of slavery, the suffrage movement, and reforms might not have made the headlines every day, their cumulative effect was immense, shaping the social and political landscape of the modern world. The abolition of slavery, as we saw, was one of the most significant victories in the fight for emancipation, but it was not a simple or immediate process. The end of slavery in the Americas, particularly in the United States, came as the result of decades of struggle and sacrifice. Abolitionists like and Sojourner Truth had to endure public vilification and violence, yet their unwavering commitment to the cause eventually helped bring about the end of slavery. The passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865 marked a victory, but it was only the beginning of a much longer journey. While legally free, former enslaved people in the United States continued to face discrimination, segregation, and systemic inequality, issues that persist to this day. The fight for racial equality did not end with the abolition of slavery. It evolved into the civil rights movement of the 20th century and continues today in the fight against racial injustice and inequality. The 19th century abolitionist movement laid the groundwork for future battles for equality, not just in the United States but across the world. The ideals of freedom, justice, and equality that abolitionists championed in their time became the rallying cries for subsequent generations of activists who continued to challenge the structures of oppression. Similarly, the rise of women's rights during the 19th century was not just about gaining the right to vote. It was part of a larger struggle for women's dignity, autonomy, and equality. The suffragists of the 19th century, like Susan B. and Pankhurst, understood that women's rights were not a single issue but a complex web of social, political, and economic inequalities. The fight for suffrage was intrinsically linked to issues of education, property rights, and the broader recognition of women as equal citizens. The suffrage movement's success in voting rights for women in the early 20th century was a monumental achievement, but it was only part of the larger struggle for gender equality. As we reflect on the suffrage movement, it becomes clear that the fight for women's rights was, and continues to be, about more than just the ballot box. It is about the recognition of women as full participants in society, with equal access to opportunities, resources, and power. The movement, too, had a profound impact on the course of the 19th century. Industrialization brought unprecedented wealth to a small elite, but it also created vast disparities in living conditions, especially for workers in factories, mines, and railroads. The movements that arose in response to these conditions sought to address the exploitation of workers and secure their basic rights. Workers organized into unions, fought for better wages and working conditions, and pushed for shorter work hours and better safety standards. The achievements of the movement were significant. The establishment of the 8-hour workday, the recognition of unions, and the introduction of basic protections were victories that improved the lives of millions of workers. These reforms did not come easily, and they were often met with fierce opposition from employers and governments. Yet, through strikes, protests, and political activism, workers were able to secure their rights and set the stage for the modern laws that we take for granted today. The movement also raised important questions about economic inequality and the distribution of power. While the fight for workers' rights in the 19th century primarily focused on issues like wages and working conditions, it also laid the foundation for later debates about the role of capitalism, wealth distribution, and the rights of the working class. The legacy of the movement is still felt today, as workers continue to fight for fair wages, benefits, and workplace protections in an increasingly globalized economy. Looking back on the long road to emancipation, it becomes clear that these unnoticed revolutions were not just about specific rights or achieving isolated victories. They were part of a broader movement toward human dignity, justice, and equality. These revolutions challenged the deeply entrenched systems of power and privilege that existed in the 19th century and laid the groundwork for the social and political changes of the 20th century. The abolition of slavery, the fight for women's rights, and the rise of movements were not isolated events, but rather part of a larger struggle for freedom, one that continues to unfold today. The legacy of these 19th century revolutions is not just in the legal victories they achieved, but in the values they championed. The idea that all people, regardless of race, gender, or class, deserve equal rights and opportunities is a cornerstone of modern democratic societies. These movements help to redefine the very concept of what it means to be free. Emancipation, in this context, is not just about the absence of chains or the ability to vote, though both are important, but about the recognition of every person's inherent dignity and worth. As we reflect on the long road to emancipation in the 19th century, we are reminded that social change is often a slow, incremental process. The revolutions of this period were not marked by sudden, dramatic moments of triumph, but by years of struggle, resistance, and persistence. It was through the work of countless individuals, many of whom went unrecognized in their time, that the world was changed. Looking to the future, we must ask ourselves, what does emancipation mean today? How can we continue the work of those who fought for freedom, equality, and justice in the 19th century? And what can we learn from their struggles as we confront the challenges of our own time? The road to emancipation, though long and difficult, is a road that continues to be paved by the tireless efforts of those who believe in the possibility of a more just and equal world. The revolutions of the 19th century may have been unnoticed in their time, but their impact on the world is undeniable, and their legacy is one that continues to inspire and guide us today. When we think of the great civilizations of the ancient world, names like Rome, Greece, Egypt, and Mesopotamia often come to mind. These societies are well documented in history books, and their legacies are still visible today in the form of monumental ruins, rich cultural traditions, and intellectual achievements. However, the ancient world was home to many other societies that have been all but forgotten by modern historians. Entire kingdoms and cities, once flourishing and full of life, have vanished into the sands of time, leaving behind only fragments of their existence, bits of pottery, crumbling walls, and a few cryptic inscriptions. Mystery of these lost civilizations has captivated archaeologists and historians for centuries. How did these once powerful kingdoms disappear? Were they destroyed by invaders, swallowed by natural disasters, or simply abandoned? The disappearance of these civilizations has often been a subject of myth and speculation, with many theories offering explanations for their sudden decline. Yet, despite the numerous efforts to uncover their secrets, some of these lost kingdoms remain shrouded in mystery. One of the most fascinating examples of a vanished kingdom is the ancient city of Petra, the capital of the Nabatean kingdom. Petra, located in present-day Jordan, was a thriving trade hub for centuries. The city, known for its elaborate rock-cut architecture and water management systems, was an engineering marvel. It was strategically located at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, where goods from Asia, Africa, and Europe converged. The Nabateans, a group of Arab traders, became incredibly wealthy and influential, but their city was suddenly abandoned in the 7th century, its grandeur lost to time. The reasons for Petra's decline are still debated by scholars. Some believe that the rise of Islam and the shift in trade routes played a role, while others suggest that an earthquake, or a series of natural disasters, could have caused irreparable damage to the city's infrastructure. Despite its abandonment, Petra remained largely forgotten by the outside world until its rediscovery in the 19th century. Today, it is one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world, and it stands as a testament to the lost kingdoms of antiquity. Petra is just one example of a vanished kingdom, but it raises important questions about the fragility of ancient civilizations. Even the most advanced and prosperous societies can fall into ruin. The decline of the Nabatean kingdom and the abandonment of Petra suggest that sometimes the collapse of a civilization is not the result of a single catastrophic event, but rather a gradual series of factors: economic decline, changes in trade routes, or the shifting balance of power that lead to its eventual demise. Another example of a lost kingdom is the ancient civilization of the Hittites, who once ruled a vast empire in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and parts of the Near East. The Hittites are known for their advanced military technology, including the use of chariots in battle, and for their diplomatic achievements, particularly their treaties with Egypt. The Hittite Empire reached its height in the 14th century BCE, but mysteriously disappeared from the historical record by the end of the 12th century BCE. For centuries, historians were baffled by the sudden disappearance of the Hittites. Their empire seemed to collapse almost overnight, and for a long time, scholars had little idea of what had caused their downfall. Was it invasion by the Sea Peoples, a mysterious group of marauders who attacked the eastern Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age? Or was it the result of internal strife, economic collapse, or natural disasters? It wasn't until the early 20th century that archaeologists made a breakthrough in understanding the fate of the Hittites. Excavations at the ancient city of Hattusa, the Hittite capital, revealed vast amounts of clay tablets written in the Hittite language. These tablets contained important records about the political and military history of the empire, providing new insights into the causes of its collapse. While the full reasons for the Hittite Empire's decline remain unclear, the discovery of Hattusa and the deciphering of the Hittite language have shed light on this once great civilization. The story of the Hittites highlights a crucial aspect of the study of lost kingdoms: the importance of preserving and interpreting the records of ancient societies. Written texts, inscriptions, and other offer valuable clues about the lives of those who came before us. Without these records, entire civilizations could easily slip into obscurity, their stories lost forever. Fortunately, through the efforts of archaeologists, historians, and linguists, many of these forgotten kingdoms have been rediscovered, and their histories are beginning to emerge from the shadows of time. But not all ancient civilizations were as fortunate as the Hittites. Some vanished entirely, leaving behind no trace of their existence. One such example is the mysterious Indus Valley Civilization, one of the most advanced urban cultures in the ancient world. The Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished around 2500 BCE in what is now Pakistan and India, was known for its well-planned cities, advanced drainage systems, and a script that remains undeciphered to this day. Despite its remarkable achievements, the Indus Valley Civilization collapsed around 1900 BCE, and its cities were abandoned. The reasons for this decline are still unknown, as the script of the Indus people has not been deciphered, and no written records have been found that explain the collapse. Some scholars suggest that changes in climate, such as a shift in the course of the Indus River, may have disrupted agriculture and trade. Others believe that the civilization may have been affected by invasions or internal conflict. Yet, despite extensive archaeological work, the exact cause of the Indus Valley Civilization's collapse remains one of the great mysteries of ancient history. The disappearance of the Indus Valley Civilization serves as a poignant reminder of how easily societies can vanish without leaving a trace. It also underscores the challenges faced by modern historians and archaeologists in reconstructing the history of ancient civilizations. While some lost kingdoms have been rediscovered, and their stories pieced together through the careful study of, others remain shrouded in mystery, with only faint traces of their existence left behind. The study of these vanished kingdoms raises important questions about the nature of civilization itself. What makes a society truly enduring? Is it the strength of its military, the brilliance of its leaders, or the stability of its economy? Or is it something more elusive, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances and the resilience of its people in the face of adversity? The stories of the lost kingdoms remind us that civilizations, no matter how powerful or advanced, are ultimately fragile, subject to forces beyond their control, whether internal or external. The vanished kingdoms of antiquity also offer valuable lessons for us today. In a world where we often take the stability of our societies for granted, the collapse of these ancient civilizations serves as a reminder of the importance of sustainability, adaptability, and resilience. As modern civilizations face challenges such as climate change, political instability, and economic uncertainty, the lessons of the past are more relevant than ever. The histories of these lost kingdoms may be forgotten, but the lessons they offer continue to echo through time. As we continue our journey through the vanished kingdoms of antiquity, it's important to delve deeper into the factors that led to the fall of these once great civilizations. While some of the causes of their decline may seem specific to their time and place, there are patterns that emerge when we study these lost kingdoms. From the ancient city of Petra to the fall of the Indus Valley Civilization, the stories of these civilizations offer valuable insights into the forces that shape the rise and fall of societies. What common threads can we identify in these disappearances? And more importantly, what can we learn from them today? One of the most common reasons for the decline of ancient civilizations was the disruption of trade networks. Many of these kingdoms were reliant on trade routes that connected them to distant lands, bringing in goods, wealth, and resources that were essential to their survival. When these trade routes were cut off or altered, the consequences could be devastating. In the case of Petra, the Nabatean kingdom's prosperity was deeply tied to its location at the crossroads of ancient trade routes. As the Roman Empire expanded, trade routes shifted, and the once thriving city of Petra, cut off from its vital commercial connections, began to wither. Similarly, the Indus Valley Civilization, with its advanced urban planning and sophisticated infrastructure, thrived due to its strategic position near the Indus River and its trade with Mesopotamia and other regions. Yet, when shifts in climate and changes to the river's course may have disrupted agriculture and the economy, the civilization struggled. The breakdown of its trade networks, along with possible internal social changes, led to the decline of its cities. Without the flow of resources and goods, these once advanced urban centers were abandoned, lost to the sands of time. Trade routes were not the only lifeline of ancient kingdoms, however. Many of these civilizations depended on the stability of the natural environment. Droughts, floods, and other environmental factors could have severe consequences, particularly in societies dependent on agriculture. The loss of fertile land or the diversion of water supplies could trigger economic collapse, which in turn would lead to social unrest and the eventual decline of the civilization. One such example of environmental disruption is the case of the Maya civilization in Central America. The ancient Maya cities, with their impressive pyramids, palaces, and sophisticated astronomical knowledge, were once thriving centers of culture and power. Yet by the end of the 9th century, many of the southern cities of the Maya collapsed. While the exact reasons for this decline remain a matter of scholarly debate, environmental factors are often cited as a contributing cause. Extended periods of drought, combined with overpopulation and deforestation, may have led to the depletion of the land's resources, undermining the Maya's agricultural base. As food and water became scarce, the once great cities were abandoned, their buildings crumbling as their population dispersed. Environmental changes, of course, are not always gradual. Sometimes, sudden and dramatic events, such as volcanic eruptions or earthquakes, could devastate entire societies. One of the most famous examples of a catastrophic natural disaster is the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which buried the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under a thick layer of ash. The eruption preserved the cities in extraordinary detail, offering us a unique glimpse into daily life in the Roman world. While the eruption of Vesuvius was a singular event, it highlights how vulnerable societies are to natural disasters. For civilizations reliant on agriculture and trade, a sudden shift in the environment could spell disaster. The decline of these lost kingdoms is not always attributed solely to external forces, however. Many of these societies experienced internal turmoil, from political instability to economic mismanagement, that weakened their foundations and made them more susceptible to external pressures. For example, the fall of the Hittite Empire, while partly due to invasions by the mysterious Sea Peoples, was also linked to internal factors. The empire faced a series of weak rulers, economic struggles, and social upheaval that contributed to its eventual collapse. As internal divisions grew, the empire became less capable of defending itself against external threats, leading to its eventual disintegration. Similarly, the ancient Egyptian New Kingdom, which once ruled over a vast empire stretching from Nubia in the south to the Levant in the north, began to unravel due to a combination of military overextension and political instability. The decline of Egypt's power in the later years of the New Kingdom can be attributed to the weakening of central authority, the high costs of maintaining a large standing army, and the inability to adapt to changing political realities. Over time, Egypt's once dominant position in the ancient world was eroded, and it fell under the control of foreign powers such as the Libyans, Nubians, and later the Persians and Greeks. Another critical factor in the decline of many of these ancient kingdoms was the failure to adapt to changing economic systems. Many ancient societies were based on agrarian economies, relying on the rural population to produce the resources needed to sustain urban centers. However, as economies grew more complex and urbanized, these societies struggled to adapt to the demands of an increasingly interconnected world. In some cases, the inability to diversify their economies or manage resources effectively led to stagnation and collapse. Take, for example, the case of the Minoans, an ancient civilization that flourished on the island of Crete in the Aegean Sea. The Minoans were known for their advanced trade networks, impressive palaces, and vibrant art and culture. Yet their society eventually collapsed, possibly due to a combination of internal political instability, natural disasters, such as the eruption of the Thera volcano, and invasions by the Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland. While the Minoan economy was initially thriving, its failure to adapt to shifting political and economic circumstances, along with the vulnerability of their isolated position, likely contributed to their downfall. The decline of these ancient kingdoms also reflects a broader lesson about the inherent fragility of civilization. No matter how advanced or powerful a society becomes, it remains subject to forces beyond its control, be they environmental, social, political, or economic. The fall of these great civilizations serves as a reminder that even the most impressive kingdoms can vanish in the blink of an eye, leaving behind only traces of their former glory. The study of these vanished civilizations continues to fascinate historians and archaeologists because it raises important questions about the nature of human society and its relationship with the world around it. How do civilizations rise to greatness, and why do they fall? What makes them resilient, and what causes them to crumble? And perhaps most importantly, what lessons can we draw from the rise and fall of these kingdoms to ensure that we, as a global society, avoid the same fate? As we approach the conclusion of our exploration of vanished kingdoms, it becomes apparent that the history of lost civilizations is not just a tale of ancient societies fading into obscurity. Instead, it is a reminder of the impermanence of human and the complex interplay of factors, both external and internal, that contribute to the rise and fall of civilizations. Through the study of these forgotten cities and kingdoms, we gain valuable insights into the vulnerabilities that all societies face, regardless of their size, power, or technological achievements. One of the most important lessons we can draw from the fall of these ancient kingdoms is the significance of adaptability. Civilizations that were able to adapt to changing circumstances, whether environmental, political, or economic, were more likely to survive and thrive. Those that failed to adapt to new challenges, however, were often doomed to decline. The collapse of the Indus Valley civilization, for example, can be partly attributed to environmental changes, such as the shifting course of the Indus River, which disrupted agriculture and trade. Similarly, the fall of the Maya civilization, though complex and multifaceted, involved environmental factors like prolonged drought, which weakened their ability to sustain large urban centers. In contrast, civilizations that were able to innovate and adapt to shifting conditions had a better chance of surviving. The ancient Egyptians, for example, endured for thousands of years, thanks in part to their ability to manage the Nile River's annual floods and their innovations in agriculture and architecture. While the New Kingdom eventually fell due to a combination of internal instability and external pressures, Egypt's longevity as a civilization was rooted in its adaptability to both environmental and political changes. The importance of resilience in the face of external threats is another theme that emerges when studying lost kingdoms. Many of the civilizations that fell were not entirely wiped out by their enemies, but rather weakened over time due to internal strife or failure to defend their borders. The Hittites, for example, fell victim to invasions by the Sea Peoples, but their internal political struggles and weakening power also played a significant role in their decline. Likewise, the ancient city of Carthage, one of the most powerful naval empires in the Mediterranean, was ultimately destroyed by Rome in the Third Punic War. Despite its military prowess, Carthage was unable to withstand the prolonged pressure of Roman expansion and the internal divisions that plagued its political structure. Yet even in the face of conquest, some kingdoms and civilizations managed to leave lasting legacies. The influence of the ancient Egyptians, for instance, can still be seen in the art, architecture, and religious practices of later cultures, even after their political power had waned. Similarly, the cultural contributions of the ancient Greeks and Romans, whose empires eventually fell, continue to shape Western thought and institutions. These legacies, though often overshadowed by the eventual decline of the civilizations that created them, demonstrate the enduring impact that societies can have on future generations. Another striking aspect of the study of lost civilizations is the idea that their collapse was often not a singular event, but rather a gradual process that unfolded over decades or centuries. The fall of great cities like Petra, Hattusa, and even Rome itself occurred over extended periods, often marked by slow economic decline, gradual shifts in power, and the erosion of social cohesion. This slow unraveling of societies is something that modern civilizations must keep in mind as they confront their own challenges. While the collapse of a society may not always be immediately apparent, it can take place over a prolonged period, with the early signs of decline often overlooked or dismissed. The rediscovery of these lost kingdoms, however, is not just a tale of tragedy. In many cases, the process of the ruins of ancient cities has led to remarkable breakthroughs in our understanding of history. For example, the rediscovery of the city of Pompeii, buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, provided unprecedented insights into daily life in the Roman Empire. Similarly, the excavation of Hattusa, the capital of the Hittite Empire, has yielded valuable information about the civilization's politics, military, and culture. These discoveries allow us to reconstruct the histories of civilizations that were once lost to time, shedding light on their achievements, their failures, and the lessons they offer for future generations. The study of vanished kingdoms also serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of preserving history. The cities and civilizations we have uncovered, while valuable in their own right, represent only a fraction of the lost heritage of humanity. For every kingdom that has been rediscovered, countless others remain hidden beneath the earth or submerged beneath the seas. The destruction of ancient, whether through looting, war, or environmental factors, means that much of our shared history may be lost forever. This underscores the importance of archaeology, preservation efforts, and the protection of cultural heritage. The more we learn from the past, the better equipped we are to face the challenges of the present and future. As we reflect on the vanished kingdoms of antiquity, it is impossible not to draw parallels between the collapse of these ancient societies and the challenges facing modern civilizations. In an era of rapid technological change, climate crises, political upheaval, and economic instability, we are reminded that no society, no matter how advanced, is immune to the forces that can erode its foundations. The rise and fall of ancient kingdoms teach us that success is not guaranteed by military might, wealth, or innovation alone, but by the ability to adapt, to recognize the need for change, and to cultivate resilience in the face of adversity. Ultimately, the story of lost civilizations is not one of failure, but of the transience of human achievement. These kingdoms may have fallen, their cities swallowed by the sands of time, but their influence lives on in their ideas and legacies they left behind. The ruins of Petra, the tablets of the Hittites, the remains of the Maya cities, each piece of evidence tells us something profound about the human condition. The story of these vanished kingdoms is one of hope and warning, a reminder that civilizations rise and fall, but the lessons they leave behind can continue to guide us long after their collapse.